Tonight's news edition, His Majesty the King meets in Aqaba with U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry to discuss developments related to the ongoing Palestinian-Israeli peace negotiations. Ukraine's Crimean parliament decides to hold a referendum on joining Russia on March the 16th, deepening the divide between Russia and the West. And the UN Aid Chief for Humanitarian Affairs says the religious mix in the Central African Republic must be maintained if the extremely grave situation in the country is to be stabilized. Good evening and very warm welcome to the news. His Majesty the King met in Aqaba with U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry to discuss developments related to the ongoing Palestinian-Israeli peace negotiations. Kerry, who arrived in Jordan on a short visit, briefed the King on the outcome of a recent visit by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to Washington and his meeting with U.S. President Barack Obama. During the meeting, His Majesty urged all parties as well as the international community to support efforts to achieve just and comprehensive peace in the region based on the two-state solution leading to the establishment of an independent Palestinian state on the 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. Jordan's higher interests, the King added, are the top priority when it comes to discussing final status issues in the Palestinian-Israeli negotiations. Kerry praised King Abdullah's continued efforts to bring about peace, security and stability in the Middle East. The U.S. Secretary of State arrived in Aqaba from the Italian capital, Rome, where he attended a conference on Libya and held meetings on the crisis in Ukraine. Over to Syria, intense fighting between rebels and government forces was reported in the rebel-held town of Yabrud in Qalamun. Official sources said rebels were shelling a tank that belongs to government forces. Witnesses said an explosion was heard and thick smoke rose in the air. Meanwhile, in Aleppo, a building was set on fire in the district of As-Sukkari, and firefighters in the district were trying to control the blaze. In the latest development in Ukraine, the Crimean parliament decided to hold a referendum on joining Russia on the 16th of this month. The decision is expected to further deepen the crisis over Ukraine and draw more tension between the West and Russia. Russia, meanwhile, has warned it would retaliate against proposed Western sanctions over its interference in Ukraine. More in this report.
The standoff between Ukraine and Russia continues as global leaders push for a diplomatic solution to the crisis. Ukraine's interim prime minister warned the Crimean parliament no one in the civilized world will recognize its referendum on joining Russia. Arseniy Yatsenyuk and others in the Kiev government have called the vote unconstitutional and illegitimate.
I want to be very clear. Crimea was, is and will be an integral part of Ukraine. No concessions, full stop.
The decision by Crimea Parliament to hold a referendum on joining Russia splits the residents of Crimean capital Simferopol and deepens the divide between the southern region and the rest of the country. Protesters in Simferopol demonstrated against the parliament's decision for Crimea to join the Russian Federation and set a referendum for March 16th. The people gathered here and said they don't want to split from Ukraine.
We want them to leave our home, leave our Crimea. We want peace, not war.
Pro-Russian residents were chanting in full swing as demonstrators made it clear that the interim government in Kiev does not represent them. In the capital, Ukrainians gathered outside Russian embassy to protest against Russia's military presence in Crimea. President Vladimir Putin denied that the forces with no national insignia that are surrounding Ukrainian troops in their bases in Crimea are under Moscow's command. Following Friday praise, Crimean Tatar Muslims said they are determined to boycott the referendum set to decide on whether Crimea will separate from Ukraine and join Russia. In the meantime, Russia's upper house of parliament said it will support Crimea's decision if the Ukrainian region decides in a referendum to join Russia. European Union leaders and President Barack Obama denounced the referendum as illegitimate, saying it would violate Ukrainians' constitution. In Moscow, over 20,000 people gathered on Red Sea Square in support of the Crimean people. The crisis on Crimea represents the most serious East-West confrontation since the end of the Cold War. Luay Balkar for the news at 10.
Turkish Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan threatened to ban Facebook and YouTube in Turkey in an attempt to stop political foes anonymously posting audio recordings purportedly exposing corruption and other malpractices in his inner circle. In the latest recording, Valerie Amos said the religious mix in cities in the Central African Republic must be maintained if the extremely grave situation in the country is to be stabilized. Following a visit to the conflict-torn country, Amos told a news conference that fewer than 1,000 Muslims were believed to remain in the capital Bangui and that action had to be taken fast. She said that only a fraction of the funds towards the UN's $551 million appeal had been received despite ethnic cleansing and the urgent need to provide hungry people with food and basic services. The UN Security Council is considering a proposal for a nearly 12,000-strong peacekeeping force to stop the country from sliding further into chaos.
Given the scale of what is required in Central African Republic, we have to set ourselves some relatively modest tasks to achieve in the short term, just to give people a sense of stability. And I think that if we are able, for example, to do that in 2, 3, 4 areas of the country where you still have mixed communities and where you can demonstrate that people can continue to live together side by side in a degree of peace and harmony, that would be a really good message for Central African Republic right now.
Following on from Ellen DeGeneres, Bradley Cooper, Brad Pitt and others taking a celeb-filled selfie at the Oscars, a lemur at London Zoo has decided to get in on the act. Beckley, a 12-year-old male ringtail lemur, grabbed the camera from a keeper during feeding time and took some selfies. But Beckley's actions did not come as much of a surprise to the zookeeper, who described how the lemur has a colourful personality. Jari-Matti Latvala was fastest in shakedown at Rally Mexico as Volkswagen set a strong pace through the opening gravel action of the 2014 season. Latvala, who leads the WRC after winning in Sweden last month, was fastest by 1.1 seconds in his Polo R through the dusty 6.27-kilometer Llano Grande stage. The Finn posted his best time on his fourth run. Citroen's Chris Mike went second fastest on his fourth and final run to move ahead of Sébastien Ogier, who came in third. Barcelona is preparing for Saturday's clash against Real Valladolid without key players, including defender Carlos Puyol and centre-half Gerard Piqué, who is still recovering from a calf strain. Coach Gerardo Martino has a lack of options in defence, where Javier Mascherano, who previously played in midfield, has become a regular centre-half. Sergio Busquets and Alex Song have also been tried out in the position, but their lack of pace has been exposed. Following the match against Valladolid, Martino's team faced Manchester City in the Champions League last 16 second leg clash next week. Leighton Hewitt cruised past fellow Australian Matthew Ebden 7-6, 3-6, 6-3 in the first round at Indian Wells. Hewitt will next face South African Kevin Anderson, who has been a losing finalist in his past 2 ATP events. And finally, dusty tonight with some clouds and southeasterly moderate to brisk winds. Warm and dusty weather continues tomorrow across the hilly areas with possible light rain, while winds will be southeasterly brisk. The Jordan Valley should expect relatively hot weather tomorrow, with a high expected to reach 30 degrees at the Dead Sea. The Gulf of Aqaba should expect relatively hot and dusty weather tomorrow, with a chance for light showers, while winds will be southwesterly fresh and seas slightly choppy. Next are the lows and highs for tonight and tomorrow. And to close, here is a reminder of the day's top stories. His Majesty the King meets in Aqaba with U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry to discuss developments related to the ongoing Palestinian-Israeli peace negotiations. Ukraine's Crimean parliament decides to hold a referendum on joining Russia on March the 16th, deepening the divide between Russia and the West. And the UNA Chief for Humanitarian Affairs says the religious mix in the Central African Republic must be maintained if the extremely grave situation in the country is to be stabilized. And that's the end of tonight's news. My name is Raad Liptouche. Thanks for watching. Have a good night.